Oh, it's an incalculable number of ways that somebody can bomb those first 30 seconds. We're all at the TEDx level, minor league players swinging for the fences, hoping to be featured on the homepage of TED as the talk for that day. There are 6 classic TED openings that I recommend clients use. And one of those.
This is the Social Skills Mastery Podcast, episode 264.
To really compete as a professional or business owner, you have to own the room. That's why each week I bring you hot topics, tips, and expert interviews so you can stand out in competitive places. Let's get started.
Hey, quick question. Do you ever find your heart racing right before a big moment? When the spotlight hits and your brain suddenly forgets who you are, that's not a confidence problem. That's your inner critic hijacking the controls. And I built Confidence on Cue to fix that fast. It's a short, powerful 5-minute audio that resets your mind before any meeting, presentation, or social interaction. It helps you quiet overthinking, center your energy, and step in as the impactful, impressive professional people trust and remember. When the moment matters, your mind should be your ally, not your biggest obstacle. It'll train your thoughts, emotions, and energy to work together so you walk in composed, clear, and compelling. Go grab it now at socialconfidencepro.com/switch. It'll change how you show up in every high-stakes moment from here on out. Devin Marks, welcome back.
Thank you. It's so exciting to hear you intro this program with episode 264. Congratulations.
Thank you. Devin was one of the earliest guests on the show, and it is my great pleasure to welcome him back. For listeners who just found this conversation, what's the reason that you think it's important for them to stay and listen to what we're going to talk about today?
Well, we all have ideas and stories we would like to use to shape the world. And this conversation is designed to do just that, to help let the world live your message.
Why do you think smart people struggle to communicate in a compelling way?
Great question. And the reality is the best communicators in history had trouble communicating. JFK was a disaster in his first stump speech fundraising in front of a group of little old ladies for a tea fundraiser. Winston Churchill, another disaster. Abraham Lincoln, another disaster. I was pretty darn bad when I was younger, learning how to speak. It's a learned skill, not a natural skill.
So how did you become interested in speaking to the extent that you made a successful business from it?
Well, looking in the rearview mirror, it's an easy connect the dot. But frankly, when my father sent me to Toastmasters when I was 15, I hardly expected that I would be doing anything professionally in public speaking. But that, to the Boy Scout Merit Badge, to Dale Carnegie public speaking, on and on and on. And so when I found TED Talks were brand new, really, at least to the wider public. And they really resonated. And I found myself asking, wow, what's different about this? Because by resonate, I mean they were going viral before viral was really redefined by TED. And I wanted to understand why, and I dug into that.
When someone says, I'm just not a speaker, but they still want their TED moment, what are they actually saying psychologically?
TED is the Mount Everest of idea sharing and public speaking. And that's a big, hairy, audacious goal for a lot of us. But step back and ask yourself, what's a successful TED Talk? Well, it's a message that's clearly focused, story wrapped, and action igniting. Clearly focused, story wrapped, action igniting. Those are really the 3 pillars that support the TED opportunity in communications. And step back and ask yourself, what podcast interview shouldn't be clearly focused, story wrapped, and action igniting? What elevator pitch shouldn't be? What fundraising pitch shouldn't be? And of course, what keynote?
So what is the difference between a TEDx and a TED?
TEDx, I like to say, is the minor leagues of baseball. There's a farm league, a AA, and a AAA baseball level. Big TED, I call it, is TED Summit, the TED Global, TED AI. These are national and international events that the TED nonprofit organization produces. And that's the New York Yankees playing the Boston Red Sox. So when you think of TED, it is a highly aspirational baseball field to be playing on. But we're all at the TEDx level, minor league players swinging for the fences, hoping to be featured on the homepage of TED as the talk for that day.
How can our listeners, if it's their desire, get invited to do a TED Talk or a TEDx?
Well, there are a number of ways. There are written rules, and of course, just like life, there are unwritten rules. The written instruction sheet is go to TED.com, click apply. You can nominate yourself to be a TED speaker.
And that's TED Major League.
That's TED Major League. There was a but there. And the but is that is so ridiculously competitive that while I suggest people do it, I suggest they don't wait to hear back. The real question when I begin speaking with a client is, hey, what's your Rolodex and how does it overlap with mine? Because often the application is pro forma, but the introduction between two people can facilitate things. The other approach, of course, is TEDx. And every TEDx event, I mean, there are 3,700 or so TEDx events that happen worldwide, Susan. I mean, you and I met at one many, many moons ago, but that was one of probably 2,500 way back then. 3,700 TEDx events, give or take a few hundred. There are a number of ways to find yourself to a TED or a TEDx stage. And of course, there are many calibers of stages. So not all TEDx stages are created equal, I like to say. When I'm considering working with somebody, I am always asking myself as I get to know that individual, what's their bandwidth, right? How much time do they have that they can dedicate to this? And they only know the answer to that. But then there's what's their buy-in? Do they really want this? Because this is going to demand a lot of them.
I recall when I did my TEDx, which is now, my goodness, Devin,
10 years?
11 now that it's 2026.
You're right.
Yes. That I was selected in May and the talk was in November. That is a long runway for preparation. So how much time are speakers spending these days?
You know, it varies. That would be the extreme and the ideal. 9 months, I think, is a sweet elbow room, a lot of ramp up time. It's rare that somebody knows they need to put that much time into it. And so 6 months to 4 months, it tends to be the norm. That said, I just worked with a speaker the end of last year, and his talk is about to come out. We had 3 weeks together, and that was brutal. I bought into his big idea, and I cleared my calendar so that I could be at his disposal and vice versa. I said, look, man, don't lose your job. Don't lose the love of your spouse or your kids, but put the dog in a kennel and let everybody know you need a little bit of extra forgiveness. He rolled his sleeves up and poured everything he could into it. It has been selected as a TEDx editor's pick. Less than 1% of TEDx talks get selected for that distinction. But it has not been released yet, and we don't know how it's going to perform. It might hit 10,000 views. It might hit 100,000 views. Viral, incidentally, is 100,000 views within a year. I call that, within 6 months, 100,000 views, a breakaway talk.
So how do million view talks happen?
All the stars align. The speaker doesn't only have the bench strength and the buy-in and the bandwidth. He or she also has poured themselves into many months of preparation, refinement, rehearsal, but there's also the stage. Did they pick the right TEDx stage? Now, I guide my speakers to the right TEDx stage, but sometimes they've already picked one, been assigned, been prepping for TEDx wherever. And we need to know the caliber of that stage because the lighting can affect a talk. The production value of the editing and the camera work can affect the talk. The audio can go bad. There are so many factors that go into a great event. So we need a great idea, actually better than great. We need a TED-worthy idea. We need a prep process that is top tier and geared to a seven-figure delivery. And then we also need a stage that is going to help elevate and catapult that idea.
What is a TED-worthy idea?
Well, I like to say it's not a good idea. There are a lot of good ideas, and it's not a great idea either. It's greater than great. It's TED-worthy, and it's one that's going to change the world. It's going to change minds, and also it's going to spread and become an idea that people radiate with and respond to and want to share, right? It's spread-worthy, I suppose, is a way to put it. You know, there are 100 new talks about AI, but we want a talk that resonates with your personal story and authority and finds a niche between the many talks that brings something new to stage. Here's one thing to consider. I have worked with probably just under a dozen big TED speakers who were invited to TED and brought me alongside them, in addition to the speaker training and event prep that TED brings to a speaker's idea. My space is really the TED-worthy idea at the TEDx level that justifies being featured on the homepage of TED. So TED does its own thing, right? They have full-time staff that they have to assign to a speaker. Now, sometimes a speaker has a relationship with me or another speaker coach and wants them to accent what TED already brings. I was working with somebody who's gone through 2 TED residency talks. That's one of those big TED events. And we began working on a TEDx event. And midway through, he said, Devin, whoa, time out. I have never brought this level of focus and refinement and rehearsal to any of my talks. This is something entirely different. And indeed, he's right.
But you did have a speaker who had, I believe, 50 million views.
He's ticking towards 52 million right now.
Ooh,
and
who is
yes,
this?
Dr. Robert Waldinger, a Harvard researcher who looks at health and happiness in the lives of men and families. And his talk became, in its day, the single most intensely viewed talk in the history of TED. It's a number 8 for all-time views in the history of TED. And so it's in the top 10, if you will. And it is, again, rounding the bin on 52 million views, probably this year in the second quarter.
I recall when TED first became popular that the talks were maybe in that 18 to 20 minute range. And now they're very short, but a lot of talks are short these days. Was it TED that popularized short talks?
Yes and no, in this sense. I mean, as a collective culture, our attention spans are shrinking, and that's not TED. That's social media meets iPhones meets YouTube meets all the above, right? TikTok. TED very early on distinguished itself as a conference because it had a countdown clock. No conference Really, there were no conferences out there for the most part that had countdown clocks for speakers. The traditional summit had a 40-minute keynote, 15-minute keynote with 5 to 15 minutes of Q&A on the hour, right? They would rotate in and out. A 20-minute and 18-minute talk was pretty much a TED innovation. There were some fundamentals that made all the difference in the world. And when I identified those in an academic setting in seminary, I was able to begin designing a prep process and framework for speakers based on that. And that is how we met. I was at a TEDx event in the Boston Metro, and I was able to take my method of speaker prep that I tried out in a non-TED environment with countdown clocks, actually produced a TED-style summit, and took my lessons from that to the TEDx event you and I met each other at. Thing to keep in mind, though, that was one of the biggest TEDx events in the world at the time, and it had a speaker prep process. It hadn't quite codified it, but it was forming and norming. And I wanted to learn how that group prepped speakers. So I just soaked in and learned and reflected back that process. But I peeled 5 speakers off to the side and I worked one-on-one with them. And of course, Dr. Waldinger was one of those.
He was. So what do you think most people are doing in the first, let's say, 30 seconds that makes the audience mentally check out?
Oh, it's an incalculable number of ways that somebody can bomb those first 30 seconds. But there are 6 classic TED openings that I recommend clients use. And one of those you see in Dr. Waldinger's talk. He asks a big question that everyone in the audience can relate to. That's one option. Another, of course, is a personal story, but each of these can be done wrong, right? A big question is not going to soak in the audience and keep their attention beyond 15 seconds, much less 30 and then another 30 and then another 30. Same too with a talk that opens in a story. This is one of those classic fumbles. Everybody thinks a TED Talk needs to open with a vulnerable, authentic, if not painful memory or moment of an epiphany.
Become quite cliche.
It has, and then 2 theater types, performers, movie, theater, television actors, they bring their own sense of drama and storytelling to that opportunity, and it bombs again and again and again. Brene Brown, popularized the idea of an authentic message and a vulnerable message, but she has a caveat, an asterisk to that she touches on again and again, and it's don't go TMI. Right? Don't make them squirm in their seats with that too vulnerable, too dramatic, and too revealing story. Those with the gift of nervous gab need to be disciplined and reined in. The reverse, of course, is true. Those who can't fluently string together a number of sentences, much less a paragraph of content, need to be coached as well. The trick in answering a question like you just asked is directly speaking to it as tight and as short a format as possible, I guess is, the standard in interviewing, whether television or radio, is a 30-second or less response. And that's a challenge. That's a challenge for most people. And even on the TED stage, the unwieldy, undisciplined, wandering and meandering script is frankly too common.
You work with a 5-fold focus framework. Why does it matter?
Well, so let's step back and look at those 3 concepts. 5-fold focus, a clearly focused message, is a TED-style message. A story-wrapped message, I say, is a TED-style message, and an action-igniting. Those sound so basic, don't they? I mean, what public speaker who went through the Boy or Girl Scout merit badge of public speaking doesn't want to be focused, doesn't want a story, and doesn't want a call to action? But I always say TED took those tools, focus, story, and CTA, and customized them. It tweaked them. They mean something different in the TED context. And it's one thing to say you're focused. It's another thing to say you're 5-fold focused. And by that, I mean, level 1, is that big idea truly big and TED-worthy and pithy enough to be phrased in 10 words or less, alliterative, clear, simple, repeatable? A perfect example, of course, would be Dr. Waldinger's big idea, his through line. The good life is built with good relationships. Pretty clear. Pithy, fewer than 10 words, 3-part structure. Tell me about the good life, right? The good life is built. How do you build it? The good life is built with what are good relationships? These are the thoughts the audience is having as they hear that. And another level of comprehension for the audience is, oh, I kind of knew that, right? We want this through line to be, this big idea to be familiar enough for the audience that they kind of already knew it. They're familiar with it, and thus they can repeat it. The second level is, look, that big idea needs to be supported by some key points. And too many speakers go 7 points, 17 points, 27 points. The audience is not going to remember that. The audience is going to remember 5 or fewer. We know that through research. And really, 3 is the sweet spot. So in the land of TED, that second layer, that second fold of focus, that second layer of focus is what TED calls the rule of 3. So that focused message needs to have one clear big idea supported by 3 or fewer key points, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
What are the differences between informing your audience and moving them?
That's a great question. One way to approach this is, look, informing is not the goal. That's counterintuitive. Of course, we want to get our statistics and our research and our message and call to action to-dos out the door with the audience. But really, to engage an audience, we need to be able to relate to an audience and they to us. There's no more powerful way to do that than through story. But a particular form of story, which goes to my second principle, right? 5-fold focus, story wrapped in action igniting. Storytelling, we all know, good storytelling. We see it on television, on Netflix. We heard it when we were a kid curled up to grandpa as we read a book right before bedtime. Storytelling, we know good storytelling, but guess what? Storytelling is really hard when you have to tell a story, right? A friend of mine says storytelling is easy until you have to tell a story. And that story needs to have a job to do. It needs to have a purpose in the TED context. So, it needs to stick in the memory. And there's a way to design and frame and shape a story so that it's sticky. And there's a way to not. And the way not to make for a sticky TED-worthy story is to just share a vignette, an example, an illustration, an anecdote. Those are not stories in the TED style. But that connection that compels an audience to move and take action is what we're shooting for in the TED context. The name of my firm was one that we refined over time, Connect to Compel. We want to connect with the audience and compel them to take action.
Why do experts tend to over-explain? What are they afraid will happen if they don't?
That's an interesting question. The expert is doubting themselves. You're familiar with the term imposter syndrome. And sometimes an expert who's trying to prove to the audience that they are an expert over-informs. And they miss the opportunity to leverage a connection, a little synapse that pops. And if they're going on and on and on and on and layering the point with more and more and more information, they're going to miss that opportunity to connect and compel.
Do you think some people use complexity as a defense mechanism almost?
That's probably true. Too many people think expertise means lots and lots and lots of information. And so an expert on stage sharing a speech or a talk needs to deliver lots and lots of information. What TED taught us is less is more, is the cliche.
Why does simplifying feel risky to smart people?
As an expert, as an author, as a researcher, we know all the nuance and detail that goes into the subtleties of why A connects with B and leads to C. And we want to share that with our audience, our listener. We want them to almost, cram a PhD into 15 minutes of presentation. You can't. You need to strip back from that and let a lot of that information that can distract the audience, the listener, from action. You need to strip that and let it just fall to the ground, right? I like to say the minimalistic TED outline only has so many hooks for information to hang on. The rest of it just ends up on the cutting room floor. And understanding that as an expert is not natural. Expertise is something earned and learned over years, if not decades, through a PhD or an informal process of learning as you go. And all that nuance seems so important, but it isn't. What matters most to your listener, to your audience, is what matters to them. And so finding a way to connect with what matters to them is the way to move that idea into action.
Well, for my audience, let's say that they want to present well and speak well in a meeting, a conference, a pitch, perhaps on a small stage. And of course, others have bigger desires to be on TED stages or keynote speakers at major conferences. So what could help someone to sound like a leader within 10 seconds before the audience even agrees or has buy-in?
Take the time to prepare that 10-second share. Too many times we wing it. Too many times we share it here, share it there, share it everywhere, and eventually it refines and we figure out what works, as opposed to stepping back and milling the idea, all right? So my process is to take an idea, pre-idea or a formed idea, and challenge it, stress test it, mill it, refine it, and then move to scripting, and then move to rehearsals, and then move to stage. I like to say TED-style tools can improve any message anywhere. And what are those tools? Well, we've touched on a few of them. Fivefold focus is one. Story wrapping a message is two. Making sure that message is action igniting in the TED style is the third.
What's the smallest speaking challenge a socially reluctant or hesitant person can do weekly that can change how they show up over the course of a year?
Practice speaking to other people. There's every opportunity to make yourself uncomfortable in front of other people, right? One-on-one in Zoom, one in group on Zoom. Hey, take a moment, 90 seconds each, and introduce yourself. That's something you can fumble and stumble through, or as you know, Susan, you can be coached to leverage those 90 seconds so that they are impactful, memorable, and lead to more conversations. And of course, the same thing applies in any other context, whether a boardroom or a small room, on an elevator, in a small group, whether at church or synagogue, whether in your reading group. These are all opportunities to convey an idea from center stage or center screen. Now, albeit in a small group, a reading circle, that's a really small stage, but it still is an opportunity to present to others. And practice and presenting again and again in all these contexts are what make for a better TED Talk, much less a better communicator or a more confident communicator.
What communication habit can help someone instantly increase their perceived competence?
Clarity and refinement in preparation. Again, not winging it. Thinking in advance, what's that interview question going to be? I'm working with a senior speechwriter, actually, for former department of this and that in Washington, D.C., former CEO, former speechwriter for a major Michigan college president. This guy knows communications backwards and forwards. But guess what? He was kind of winging his answers in his interviews. Each answer is a mini speech. Each answer is an opportunity to connect with the listener and compel them to take action, compel them to become an advocate to hire you, right? And so that is something that too many people miss.
Devin, what's one sentence you wish every listener would tattoo into their brain before their next talk or presentation?
TED-style tools can improve any message anywhere. Use them.
I love it. And what would you challenge my audience to do in the next 7 days to make good use of your time here?
Well, as a thank you to you for inviting me back on the show and to give your listeners a next step to do that very thing, right? There's a resource that I sell online, and I'll share a link to that. It's $197, but there's a coupon I'll share with your listeners that they can use to get 100% off, right? We've touched on this topic a little bit. It's called the message temple. It's a concept and a framework for shaping a message in any context, a podcast interview, a keynote, a TED Talk. And that message temple is a micro training, 20 minutes of their time. But it comes with examples from the TED stage. It comes with worksheets, and it comes with other learning resources that if they're so inclined, they can spend more than 20 minutes on.
Wonderful. This episode isn't just about TED Talks or short talks. It's about something a lot bigger. It's about how many smart, capable, high-performing people are walking around with ideas that could change their career or someone else's life. And they keep those ideas trapped up inside of them because speaking feels too exposing and too risky and too vulnerable. And I get it, because when you speak, you're not just sharing information, you're putting yourself on the line. But what Devin reminded us today is that confidence isn't something you either have or you don't have. It's something you build when you stop hiding and you start practicing being seen. One message, one story, one moment at a time. So if you've been playing small and staying quiet and overthinking every word, waiting until you feel ready, let this be your sign. You don't need to become someone else. You need to become more of who you already are, just out loud, because the world doesn't benefit from your brilliance when it stays private, and neither do you. Devin, thanks so much for joining me today.
Thank you, Susan. It's a delight to reconnect this way. And again, to your listeners, I want to offer a challenge and a bit of encouragement. TED-style tools can help the world live your message.
Thanks so much for joining me today. Bye for now. Wait, before you hit stop, let me leave you with this. Imagine walking into any meeting, dinner, or conversation and just settling in, not bracing, overthinking, or wondering how you're coming across. Just knowing you belong and showing up like someone whose insight carries weight and who knows the protocol and can be comfortable anywhere. If that kind of ease and confidence feels a little out of reach right now, you're not alone. A lot of high performers feel less certain in the moments when presence matters just as much as competence. And that's the gap we close. Let's talk. We'll look at what's tripping you up and what you want to feel more confident doing and what it would take to show up with social polish and presence that matches your performance. If you're ready to feel more solid, seen, and like the leader you know you can be, head to socialconfidencepro.com/coach and choose a time. It's literally your call.